Now that I'm 5 years into parenting, I would love to go back in time and give my soon-to-be mom self a little advice. But that's not possible, so instead I'm going to share it with you. Here's what I would say to get her ready for the life-changing journey ahead. So after we came home from the hospital, we were sent home with all this paperwork and these booklets with advice and things that we could reference. And then we were getting bills and thank you notes and just normal mail that would come in, and everything just kind of kept getting thrown on our countertop. And slowly it grew tall, and then it started to grow wide. And every time I would walk into the kitchen, I would just feel my anxiety kind of tick up a little bit. And meanwhile, I had this perfectly designed nursery that I had spent all of this time putting together before she was born, and it was basically getting no use. Like, maybe I'd change a diaper in there, maybe she would nap in there for 20 minutes in her crib. But what I started to realize is that I had put so much energy into this nursery and these things that I was told were the priority, but I didn't have the systems in place to meet our daily needs. There was no system for laundry or getting groceries ordered or getting meals on the table or dealing with the paper clutter. And so my first bit of advice is to get your systems in place. So let's just talk about paper. What do you need there? You need one basket for action items, one basket for things that you might need but you're not so sure, so you want to be able to reference them later, and then one box for long-term filing. That's it. You're not going to keep more than would fit in one single box. You don't need to. Get everything filed before the baby comes, and then as things come in, you can throw them in the action box or in the reference box. You don't even have to deal with them right away, but at least you know where they all are and they're not on top of your counter. So Peyton was born in June of 2020, which means that she was born in the midst of the pandemic and born to two fairly isolated adults who had no idea what they were doing. And as many of you I'm sure remember, this was a time where social norms were shifting quite a bit, and so it was really hard to reach out to others and ask for folks to come into our home. But we reached a point where we really needed help and we couldn't move forward on our own. And I remember reaching out to our friends Haley and Dallin and having them come over in the middle of the day and bringing supplies. And what I learned was, in parenting, the most important thing is having a community. There's a saying in marketing that people don't buy stuff, they buy solutions to problems. And when you become a parent, I noticed that the marketing that I was exposed to really ramped up, and I was constantly being sold solutions to the various problems or challenges that I would face in parenting. What you actually need is to get to know your neighbor. You need to get comfortable with reaching out to the friend who's going to rush over with a head of cabbage and a pint of ice cream in the middle of the day. And if you haven't had kids, the head of cabbage reference is going to seem really weird. But this is why I would recommend skipping the baby shower and having a nesting party instead. Get comfortable with letting people into your home and showing their support through acts of service rather than gifts. So when Peyton was born, I had tubs and tubs filled with baby clothes because we'd been given this big collection from multiple family members of hand-me-downs. And so I figured, I'm covered, I'm gonna have everything that I need. And then I discovered that I actually couldn't find what I needed when I needed it because I had too much. And I then came across this new, very frustrating emotion of guilt because she was growing out of clothes before I got the chance to use them. And then I heard something from the Minimal Mom that was a real turning point for me. I don't remember exactly how she said it, so it's a paraphrase, but you have too much stuff, so of course you can't keep up with it. No one can keep up with this volume of stuff. And that was the permission I needed to start to let go of some of the things that we had been very generously gifted. And that's when I discovered that having less and learning to be adaptable with the things that we had brought significantly more peace and ease in parenting. And I probably needed 10% of what I thought. So again, in those early months of parenting, I kept getting caught in this loop in my mind. I would think, I can't find anything. I need to get organized. I need to buy new shelves and bins. That's going to be really expensive. And then I would loop back around to I can't find anything, because between that's going to be really expensive and I can't find anything was this barrier of purchasing a lot of stuff in order to get organized, and that was just enough to stall me out and never find a solution. Until I heard this from Joshua Becker: it is better to own less than to organize more. And I realized that I had a very simple solution that I could take action on, and I decluttered my house within a few months in 5 to 10 minute chunks on the days that I worked, and then longer periods on the weekends, here and there where I could fit it in. And in the end, I discovered that my existing shelving was absolutely fine in that house. In this house, there was literally no shelves in the closet, so we did have to put stuff in. I don't know who builds a house and doesn't put a single shelf in the closet. Many years ago, a good friend of mine gave me this kind of gag birthday gift. It was a make a decision checklist because I was chronically indecisive, and I used it exactly one time to decide whether or not to buy a donut. I did decide to buy a donut. I don't know who has the option to buy a donut and doesn't get one. So unfortunately, the checklist didn't end up having much of an impact on my decision-making ability. But one of the things that I discovered from decluttering is that decluttering made me much better and much more confident in decision making. And it's kind of a surprising thing that came out of it. And here's why I think this happened. When you're decluttering, you end up making thousands of decisions. And in the process of learning, first we learn through having things modeled to us. So I was watching a lot of different YouTube videos, learning from different men and women who were decluttering their homes and just getting to watch and see the decisions that they were making. And then I was turning and taking what I was learning from them, and I was practicing it myself, doing it over and over and over, 10,000 times over. And you're making decisions about what stuff to keep. You're making decisions about how you want to live your life day to day. You're making decisions about what your priorities are. And so in this process, just really getting a lot more clarity about your life. And then on top of it, you get this really great feedback loop. You declutter your kitchen and suddenly cooking is a little bit easier. So I recommend, even if you don't have a lot of time, pick one area of your home and just every day chip away at it. 5 minutes, making a few decisions here and there, and slowly you will build your confidence in your own judgment, which is relevant to parenting because not only are you making your home simpler, which ultimately makes your days easier, but you're also developing this skill of decision making and confidence in your own decision making, which is a huge part of what you have to do as a parent. So in the first few years of Peyton's life, I was still working full time. So I would drop her off at 7:30 in the morning, and then I would pick her up at 5:30 in the evening. So we'd be apart for 10 hours, 5 days a week. And then in the evening, I would get home, and often I would hand her to my husband, and I would go into work mode, like cooking, cleaning up after cooking, tidying. And my husband would help with those things too, but it was just a lot to handle even for 2 people. And then on the weekends we had like laundry and errands and house projects and landscaping. And what I noticed for me is that if I wasn't doing those things and I was actually spending time with her, I was still worried about when they would get done. So I was either not with my kid or I was distracted when I was. And for me, the turning point was I watched the Minimal Moms video on doing laundry, and she talked about her system of doing a load of laundry a day, which to me initially seemed kind of like crazy because we only had 3 people in our family. And I'm like, that's gonna be really wasteful. We don't need to do laundry that often. But I recognized that it was a system. She had made a decision and she was just following through on that decision day in and day out. And I thought, well, I'm just going to try it and see how it goes. I can always adjust the system to better fit my family's needs. So my advice here is you don't have to do a load of laundry a day, but what you do have to do is decide what is my system and then set it and follow through on it. The more systems you put in place in your home, the more you can relax when you are meant to be relaxing, because there's not a big question of like, when will I get it done? You have your systems and you know when that time will come. So I'm going to go over 13 lessons today, but when I sat down to make my original list, I came up with well over 60 ideas. So if you like this video and you'd like me to make another one, please give it a thumbs up. That is the best way for me and YouTube to know that it is a good video that is worth your time and worth sharing with other people. So early on in parenting, I felt really overwhelmed by like the big questions, like how do I respond to tricky behavior? How do I educate my kids? How do I craft and shape their character? And I became really interested in and excited by modern parenting styles. Think like gentle parenting, respectful parenting, conscious parenting, intentional parenting, attachment parenting, objective parenting, stuff like that. And I just want to start by saying that I'm not saying there's no wisdom found in these philosophies, but eventually, the more I learned about them, the more I noticed that I was so fixated on the strategies that they shared that I hadn't really taken the time to understand the foundational philosophies that were guiding those strategies. And strategies really do flow from philosophies, which tell us what is the ultimate goal here. And I discovered a couple things. One, in some cases, the ultimate goal, the characteristics that these philosophies wanted to cultivate in children, were not actually aligned with my priorities. And the second thing was that I realized that there was a worldview misalignment. So in some cases, the way that these philosophies understood human nature was diametrically opposed to how I understood it. So my recommendation would be that when you are looking at parenting strategies, work backwards. Ask yourself, what is my worldview? What do I believe about human nature? What do I believe about God? What are the characteristics I want to develop in my kids? And do these things align with the philosophy that is undergirding these strategies that are being presented to me? So I really like studying and learning about human development and child development and parenting. And if I include my time studying counseling, I've been doing this for well over a decade. And I realized recently that all of this studying has given me a lot of puzzle pieces in my mind, but I lacked the full picture of how to implement those pieces in my parenting. So if you think about a jigsaw puzzle, you get the box and you have hundreds, maybe 1,000 different pieces. And on the front of the box is the picture. And this is what you are working towards building. So you have this kind of vision, and then you have all of the pieces that you need to fit together. And last spring, I realized that I had been working without that picture, without that vision, and just a jumble of pieces that I was trying to slowly figure out and craft into this overall picture. And then I read the book Hunt Gather Parent, and as I was reading it, it was like I could literally hear the sound of puzzle pieces in my mind slowly falling and clicking into place. And there's so much wisdom in that book, but I'm going to share the bit that I have found to be most practical, which is understanding how we learn through both having things modeled and having opportunities to practice. So when it comes to my kids, I ask myself, what am I modeling to my kids? Especially when I'm seeing behaviors that I'm not loving. I have come to realize that my kids' behavior is often a crude approximation of the behavior that they are seeing in me. And then the next thing I will ask myself is, have my kids had enough opportunity to practice the behavior that I'm hoping to see more of in them? And if they're still struggling with it, how can I break it down and make it simpler? So for instance, I realized that I was often inviting Peyton to help me around the house, but I was inviting her in ways that were too complicated. I would say, come help me clean up the living room, or come help me unload the dishwasher. And that invitation was too overwhelming, and she didn't feel confident in her ability to do it. So I scaled it back to here, and I would hand her a bowl out of the dishwasher and say, please put this in the drawer. And from there, I slowly scaled up in how I invited her and the extent to which I expected her to participate in helping around the house. Now, a year later, I will open the dishwasher and she'll run up to it and say, can I please help you unload the dishwasher? Yes, you absolutely can. So I grew up in a family where there was an expectation to help out around the house. Everybody helped with chores, and I would often complain, like, but why do we have to? And my parents would always just say, because you're part of this family. And as a kid, I always felt like that response was a little bit flippant, though obviously they were right. But I think the challenge that most parents face is, how do we get kids to say that to themselves? Like, I want to help because I live here and I'm part of this family. And the author of Hunt Gather Parent discovered that in Mayan culture, that is what kids say. When anthropologists go and interview the families, interview the kids, the answer to the question, why do you help, is always because I live here. So what the author learned from these cultures, what they have learned, is that children have an innate desire to feel like essential members of the family team. But they need more than a chore chart in order to cultivate this innate desire. In Mayan culture, they call it acomedido. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, please forgive me, but it basically means the ability to observe when help is needed, the desire to give help, and the follow through to take action. So we're building the skill of acomedido, and we're gonna think about it as the way you would build a scaffolding. You don't start with the third tier of the scaffolding, you start with the base. So the first thing you do is you always accept help from a toddler. If it's complex, break it down. If it's dangerous, just invite them to watch so that they can learn. And you're doing this for two reasons. One, practicing helps to develop their skill in doing the thing. And two, by saying yes, you are fanning the flames of their eagerness to help. A lot of parents do not accept these invitations to help, or they don't even recognize when a child is trying to be helpful, because let's remember, a small child's attempts to do the things that we are modeling, like folding laundry, often look like a very crude approximation of it. So rather than them taking the laundry out carefully and one by one folding a piece and putting it away, they're grabbing it all out and throwing it on the floor. And we often interpret that as they are trying to be playful, or they are trying to cause havoc, and we are wrong. That is our inaccurate interpretation of that. In most cases, they are doing this crude approximation of what they see you doing. And so they need to be redirected and they need to be shown how to be helpful to you. And this might mean that the clothes that are folded are a little bit messily folded and shoved into drawers. It might mean that the floors that are swept are dirtier for the period of time that you have young children. But it is a long-term investment toward a 10-year-old who can grab the broom or grab the vacuum and will do so voluntarily without being asked and quite efficiently and effectively. Now, if your kids are older and you're wondering, did I miss the window on this? No, you actually can go back and kind of reignite that flame. I did this a little bit with my daughter. I had said no quite a bit in the early years, and so I had to do a little bit of that. But going back to the scaffolding, you have to think about it as building the base. So rather than giving a 9-year-old who's never been allowed to help a chore that you would think is aligned with their skill level, you have to kind of give them the chore that you would have given to the toddler. Give short, simple directions, just like, here, can you put this bowl away for me? Invite them to help you. Don't worry if they say no. You'll probably get a lot of no's at first, but eventually that innate desire will start to wake up a little bit more and you'll start to get some yeses. So in my first year as a stay-at-home mom, I found that my kids were just constantly needing my attention, to the point where I would have to spread out the process of making dinner into these little 5-minute chunks all throughout the day, which was a really great strategy if you happen to find yourself in that particular phase, but it's not ideal. And some of this, of course, is because we're isolated. You know, we live in our little homes. We don't have like other friends and aunties and grandmas popping in and other people's kids around to play with our kids, but some of it was also because of how I was parenting. I started to realize that I was talking too much, giving too much direction, interrupting their concentration when they were playing, correcting too often, being overly protective. I was communicating to my kids that this is how we interact, and this sort of constant interruption throughout their days was just the norm. And I think I was also communicating a lack of confidence in them. So they were consistently coming to me, sort of seeking reassurance about how they were spending their time and what they were doing. And, you know, I would be frustrated, but then eventually I realized, girl, you are the one who set up this dynamic. So what I did was I decided to pretend that I had laryngitis for a couple of days. I've had laryngitis a lot. The only solution is to stop talking. So I spoke as minimally as possible. In that time, I did choose to ignore some behaviors. I had to let some things slide, but it allowed me to just step back and observe the impact that it had on my kids and how they were behaving. And while the changes in a couple of days were slight, it was enough for me to be like, okay, there's something here. So I really love this story from the book Hunka Other Parent. So the author, Michaeline, is visiting the Inuits and she's kind of learning about their parenting from them, and she's with her daughter, Rosie, and they're staying at Maria's house. One day they're in Maria's living room and Rosie is playing with another little girl. They're running around, they're trying to catch the dog. And in the process of trying to catch it, Rosie knocks over a cup of coffee, kind of flies through the air and just spills all over Maria's white rug. Michaeline's initial reaction is to get really upset and to yell at her daughter. She kind of held it back. She didn't react in that moment because she noticed that none of the other adults had responded. Most of them hadn't even looked up. And then another mom walked in from the kitchen. She had a towel with her and she just kind of gently placed it on the rug, didn't say anything, didn't even reprimand Rosie. And, you know, during the time of researching her book, Michaeline ended up interviewing, well over 100 different Inuits, and they all had the exact same message. When children are little, it doesn't help to raise your voice or get angry at them. It will just make your heart rate go up. Or when you yell at children, they stop listening. And this was a really foreign concept for the author, but what she observed is that Inuit children were much better behaved than her daughter or most American children. And she learned that the Inuits just had different strategies for responding to tantrums and misbehavior. And so she was open to trying something else. But for her, the real challenge was just getting out of the habit of yelling, because it was kind of her go-to response and her brain was almost wired to do it. I used to live in Colorado and I lived out on a dirt road, and I would notice that I would always kind of fall into these well-worn tracks that had been dug in from all the cars going back and forth on it. And even if I would try to stay out of it, it was just so easy to kind of slip my tires right back in there. And that's kind of what it's like with emotions or behaviors that we are accustomed to. We have these well-worn tracks in our mind and in our bodies that we just keep defaulting to. And so the author of the book said that the first step for her of learning to yell less was to have less anger. And so the first thing she did was she would stop talking. Whenever her daughter did something that triggered her, she would just shut her mouth, press her lips together, and start observing. And then the other thing she did was that if she needed to, she would walk away. And this was also something she learned from the Inuits. They said that if they started to feel anger coming, they would walk away from the children or they would turn their backs. And it would be just enough to kind of create some mental separation so that the anger could dissipate and then they could respond more calmly. I read this parenting book once by Abby Halberstadt, and she's a mother of 10, and she was telling the story about her 2 twin girls. This is her first set of twins. They were toddlers, and they absolutely hated their car seats, and they would fight tooth and nail to get out of them. So a 20-minute car ride would become an hour-long car ride because she had to pull over so many times just to get their little arms back into the straps, which sounds incredibly frustrating. She was feeling incredibly impatient with all of this, and she kept praying this prayer to God. Why, Lord, would you put me through this kind of nonsense when it diminishes my capacity to mother my other kids well and takes so much mental energy to face each day? And then one day she finally heard her answer. What part of my death on the cross was easy, and yet look at all the good that has come from it? What I've learned as a parent is that our mindsets and how we face the challenges of parenting play a huge role in our response. And what Abby realized is that these meltdowns in her kids were an opportunity to root out impatience and self-indulgence in herself. A couple of weeks ago, Theo just lost it. And I don't even remember at this point what triggered it, but for well over an hour, he just screamed and cried. I tried all of my interventions, but absolutely nothing worked. So this kind of thing used to be very stressful until I learned 2 things. The first is that there is a difference between tantrums and meltdowns. Tantrums can be redirected, and I have great interventions that work well for those. But with meltdowns, the only way out is through. And then the second thing I've learned is that there's a purpose to both. Tantrums are opportunities for a child to practice calming themselves. Whereas with meltdowns, I think that they show the parent the strength of the existing connection between the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So the downstairs brain is responsible for basic functions like breathing and blinking, innate reactions like fight or flight, and strong emotions like anger or fear. And these are very important things. Fear is a valuable emotion that helps to keep us safe from harm. So we need this part of the brain. Whereas the upstairs brain is more sophisticated and it's responsible for sound decision making, emotional control, compassion, morality. And our goal ultimately is to be able to integrate these 2 parts of the brain so that they work together, and we're essentially building a mental staircase from downstairs to upstairs. And there are things that we can do to help to build that mental staircase while also bearing in mind that the upstairs brain does not fully develop until the mid-20s, so we always have to be conscious about having reasonable expectations. There's also a part of the downstairs brain called the amygdala that tends to trap kids in their more primitive brain. So you can almost think about it, if that staircase exists at all, almost like there is a doorway at the top of the staircase, and sometimes it gets slammed shut and the child can't get out. They're just trapped in that downstairs brain. And that is what's happening during a meltdown, which is why I say the only way out is through. So with tantrums, the first thing that I do is I stop talking. If I need to, if I'm feeling angry or I'm feeling agitated, I walk away, give myself a chance to calm down before I return, because what I need to do here is model calmness to my children. I need to model for them what I want them to get to. And then there are some other things that I can do. For one, I can use physicality. Sometimes kids need a low energy physicality in order to come out of their tantrum, and sometimes they need high energy physicality. Another thing you can do is you can teach children to replace anger with awe. They're getting upset. Look at the beautiful trees outside. Look at the clouds in the sky. Look at the way the sun is coming up over the trees. Another thing, you can go outside, and this isn't something I turn to all the time, but also putting kids in water is really helpful. So sometimes it's just, hey, let's go take a bath, and that helps to soothe them. A lot of these ideas came from the book Hunt, Gather, Parent, and these are strategies that the author learned from the Inuits. Now, the other thing she learned from them is how to respond to meltdowns. And here we're going to model calmness and we're going to remain present. Something that's important to understand is that words, movement, and emotion are stimulating. So you want to remove those as much as possible. This is why we are stopping talking. And to the extent that we do speak, it's very gently, it's very quiet. We are slowing down our body, and we are putting on our poker face. So going back to what I said earlier about modeling and practicing, I think about tantrums and meltdowns as opportunities for me to model being calm and for my kids to get practice at getting calm. They are going to have lots of challenges throughout life that ramp them up emotionally, that raise their heart rate, that cause big emotional reactions, that trigger that downstairs brain. And so they need these tools and they need this practice to be able to learn how to calm themselves when that happens. So I have come to see tantrums and meltdowns as a brilliant, beautiful gift from God. Now, I talk a lot about simplifying parenting, and I realize that sometimes the word simplify to people, they'll hear it as make something easy, but that's not really what I mean. What I mean is make parenting easier. Parenting is not easy. It's not really supposed to be, but there's also no virtue in making it harder than it needs to be. And if you're a parent who feels super overwhelmed, my first question is typically, have you simplified your home yet? And if not, then check out this video here, and until next time.